Hello and welcome to episode 77 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. And, well, it's been a while. It's been a while since I published episode number 76. In fact, it was back in November, the beginning of November of 2023. So, what's that, 3 months? I apologise. And specifically, I apologise to the people who you're about to hear in this episode of the podcast, but also to the people who listen to the podcast and the people who have contacted me saying, what's happened? Has it disappeared? Has it gone forever? Well, no, it hasn't. It is back with episode 77, which is this one. My excuses, well, I've got a few excuses. I've not been very well over the winter months. You can still probably hear I'm a little bit nasal, and I seem to have had that for a long, long time. And also, I've been concentrating on finishing the book about the cycle that I did around Europe back in 2022, which should hopefully be published at some point in the next few months. So those are my excuses, but specifically, these are the people I'd like to apologise to. First of all, Agathe Daudibon, who you're about to hear. She's the EuroVelo manager at the European Cyclists Federation, and I recorded the interview with her back in November of last year. She's talking about her role at the organisation and the development of the EuroVelo network. I'd also like to apologise to Svetlana who is currently at the end of a bike ride in New Zealand, along with her friend Quentin Muncaster. They come from Oxford in England, and they're going to be talking in a monologue about cycling the Croatian coast. And they sent me their monologue in December of last year. And finally, I'd like to apologise to Seth Maltzman. He's the third contributor to this particular podcast, and he's from Philadelphia in America. He's a lawyer, and he's going to talk about how, well, his cycle tours across Europe, well, they've kind of ended in disaster. But more of him a bit later in the podcast. But the first person on this episode of the podcast is Agathe Daudibon, who is the EuroVelo manager at the European Cyclists Federation. Thank you, incidentally, and also apologies to these two, to Jessica Casagrande and Ivan Ratkovic of the European Cyclists Federation, who helped me arrange this particular interview, so I should have added them to the earlier apologies. She is, as I said, the EuroVelo manager at the European Cyclists Federation, and I asked her to start by introducing herself.
I'm Agathe Daudibon. I'm a EuroVelo manager, so responsible for the EuroVelo team and the EuroVelo work that the European Cyclists Federation is doing. So maybe it's good also to introduce briefly EuroVelo. It's the European Cycle Route Network. It's a 25 years old project that started with some pioneers in the 90s to connect all long distance cycle routes throughout Europe. Today it's a 17 routes network, which represent 92,000 kilometers of cycle routes. So of course it's quite a big work to do to coordinate that network. Basically, I'm in charge of the transnational coordination of the network, and we work together with multiple coordinators that are in charge of developing and implementing the network at a more local level. But still, we are in charge of the communication, of the advocacy, of all of work related to that. So that's my work background. And indeed, I'm a cyclist, passionate cyclist, I would say. I do enjoy going on cycling holidays myself. And I did some trips, longer and shorter ones. So because I have a full-time job, I'm going only for 2 weeks or 1 week or sometimes weekends those days. But I did a 1 year break in 2017, 2018. And I traveled for 10 months doing 12,500 kilometers back then in different areas. Yeah, well, so I started in France because I'm French, and I've cycled through Europe a bit to Patagonia, at some point in Argentina and Chile, and I also cycled a bit in Morocco for 1 month. But actually, most of it was in Europe also, because during the trip itself, being far away from our home in Patagonia, cycling for long distances, I was with my partner, and we realized that we wanted to use the time we had to actually discover Europe by bike. So that's why also we came back to Europe, and it was a great experience to cycle using some EuroVelo routes, but not only.
Okay, thank you.
So you're from France. Whereabouts in France are you from?
I'm originally from Brittany, so the west part of France. But before moving to Brussels to start working for ECF, I was living in Lyon on EuroVelo 17, the Rhone cycle route. And from France, I'm come from very close to the Mont Saint Michel, which is EuroVelo 4, La Vélo Maritime over there. Very nice cycle route as well. Everything's connected to EuroVelo, of course.
You talked about what you've been doing in terms of cycling in recent years, but have you always been a cyclist? Did you use a bike regularly when you were a child?
I did some cycling as a child, but just for as a game. And then when I was around 10 years old, I moved with my family to a 20,000 inhabitant city, which was before I was living in a more rural area. So I was about 10, living in a small city with actually free public transport at that time. They were was of the first city doing free public transport, but there were just a few bus lines and not connecting very well my home to where I was willing to go. And yeah, I was an independent child, and so I got a bike quite during that time, around 10, to go to school by bike and to go to my activities by bike. So I was actually a cyclist at that period, from 10 to 15 years old, maybe. And then I moved away from there. I got my driving license. And then I remember when I was around 18 years old, I was driving to school because it was not convenient to take public transport. So I lost my cycling habits for a while. And then I did my Erasmus in Munich in 2010, around 2010. And Munich was presenting itself as the Radhauptstadt, the cycling capital city. And there I got into cycling in Munich. So that's actually when it was a change. And also I did my first cycling trip around that period as well. And going for the first time on a cycling adventure, I was looking more for adventure than for the cycling part. I just thought it was fun to go on a bike. And I didn't know what a greenway was. I didn't know what a cycle route was. So actually, I was just following like high speed routes on a map. On It was really not the best thing to do. And afterwards, I realized that actually there were some cycling projects, and that's probably all that path that led me to the cycling work, cycle route, and cycle tourism business.
So how did you find living in Munich compared to living in Brittany in terms of the cycling infrastructure, in terms of the attitude of people? Did you find it radically different?
Well, I was living in Rennes before, which is a studying city, and but at that time cycling was not that well developed. And yeah, in Munich there were very easy cycling infrastructure. It was very easy to get a bike as well. And yeah, I just started to use the bike, even though the winter is quite cold also, so the conditions are not ideal in the winter season. But because it's also a student city, I don't remember exactly why, but it was just convenient to move around by bike, so that's what I did. And it was the conditions were a bit better probably, and also there was kind of a marketing strategy of the city of Munich to promote cycling to the inhabitants. So I think with my today's perspective, it was quite interesting to have such a strategy, quite positive.
So did you start working in the active travel sector immediately after having been in Munich?
Well, I just finished my study in European politics, and I was interested in European politics and mainly regional European politics. So, how Europe can support local development. And when going through all the projects that were going on in Brittany, I realized that there was one interesting project. So, it was the England Channel France cross border Interreg program. I heard about this Cycle West project that the point of the project was to develop EuroVelo 1 between Cornwall and Brittany, but also EuroVelo 4 along the Channel coast in France and the continuity of this cycle route in Jersey and in South England. So this project really got my attention because I did a cycling trip before going through the European projects in Brittany. And that's how I started to get interested. As a student, I was looking for an internship. I did apply to ECF at the time, but didn't got an internship there. And I continued. I learned about EuroVelo, and I applied to the National EuroVelo Coordination Center in France Vélo et Territoire. And that's where I started my career, because I did an internship there and I stayed working 10 years with them, developing cycle routes, EuroVelo, and cycling tourism in France.
I spent a long time in 2022 cycling around France, and I think they've done a fantastic job with the named routes, with the Vélo d'Issée, the Vélo Français, yeah, the branding. I think they've done a really good job, and also with the infrastructure on things like the Via Rona. I think it's excellent. Do you think that things have changed radically in France since you were perhaps growing up in Brittany?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and I've seen, well, I've seen that mainly when working for Vélo et Territoire. I started in 2012. I left in 2022, 2021. That's very specific. And it changed radically. I mean, it's there has been COVID in between, of course, but even before that, the increase was huge. So when I started in 2012, Vélo et Territoire was starting to work on a national platform to gather counting data from automatic counters on cycle routes. At that time, there were a few in France, but maybe around 100 or something. And they celebrated the 10 years. It started in 2013, this national monitoring platform for counting data on cycle routes. Started in 2013. They celebrated this year the 10th birthday of this platform, and they compared the data. So from 100 counters taken into account in 2013, it grew to 1,000 counters in France shared in that national platform. And in terms of evolution of the traffic followed up by those counters, it showed an increase of 75%. 75% increase in numbers of bike counts recorded by those counters, but the same counters that are still in the platform in 2023 and that were there already in 2013. One tiny example of many developments that happened in terms of infrastructure, as you were saying, in terms of services also, how to qualify services for cycle tourists along cycle routes, but also parking facilities, a lot of different solutions for cyclists, for daily cyclists, but also cycling tourists. In terms of communication as well, I guess you've been using France Vélo Tourisme platform, web platform, to check the different cycle routes existing in France, to collect GPX tracks, or maybe to get more information about the services you could meet on the road. All of that together led to it was just a lot of developments that happened before COVID. And when COVID happened, everyone discovered that they had to change their travel, their tourism habits. They had to consider traveling next door. They had to maybe, yeah, just enjoying also being outside, getting outdoor during their free time. And France Vélo Tourisme was there just as a solution, as a very easy solution to experience cycling tourism. So it's growing a lot in France, but not only in Europe as well. And EuroVelo has been playing a big part of it. So yeah, I'm very proud to work for EuroVelo now and to support the further development where cycling and cycling tourism are very high already, but also support the development of cycling tourism and cycling in general. In Albania, for example, we are working with Albanian country partners, or Turkey. We had the EuroVelo and Cycling Tourism Conference, which is a professional conference in Izmir in October, and it's really a pleasure to go in Turkey, in Izmir, to realize how quality are the cycling infrastructure. EuroVelo 8 along the coast of Izmir. It's very great cycle route, and how there is a potential to further develop cycling in general for all Europeans in the broader sense. That's very inspiring, I think.
Do you develop all of the Eurovelo routes in the same way, or are there certain routes which you concentrate on because you know that there's more people who are using those routes? You know that perhaps there's more support from the governments, from the local organisations, and are there certain routes that you know they exist, but they're kind of lesser importance? Or alternatively, do you have an equal view of all of the Eurovelo routes?
Well, we are in charge of the transnational development of EuroVelo, so we are focusing on the whole network. That's our first goal, first mission. And we are not the ones developing EuroVelo routes on the ground anyway. We rely 100% on our national coordination centers. They are key, really, to develop EuroVelo on the ground. So when we don't have those networks, we don't have one contact responsible for EuroVelo development in a country, which doesn't mean that nothing is happening on EuroVelo. It just means that there is no national coordination, and it's way harder for us to get knowledge, to get information about what's happening on the ground. So our role is just to give visibility of all the efforts that local stakeholders are investing in EuroVelo. That's really important to understand.
So where is it more difficult? Which areas of Europe, which areas of the network is it more difficult to actually make those developments?
Well, the most challenging areas in Europe are the Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. I'm focusing here only on in terms of EuroVelo route development, because that's, if you don't have a route, if you don't have a sign, I mean, let's be honest, there's no, it doesn't exist, it doesn't properly exist, or you just have to go on the road and make your own trip yourself. There's no quality apart from that being offered. It's those countries where EuroVelo is still a dream more than a reality, even though in some areas it's already a reality actually. So we do publish every year a EuroVelo route development status report, which shows the evolution of the development of EuroVelo. On this report, we provide information on EuroVelo developments for each route, and we also try to focus on the developments per country. So you have a list already of where EuroVelo is the most developed. So the highest quality countries are Switzerland, France, and Belgium for the top three. Estonia is also on the top four, especially with very good EuroVelo signage developed in the country. And in the bottom of the list, there's of course a lot of European countries from the east. For example, Russia. EuroVelo is going through Russia. It's a long-term project, right? It started in 25 when there was the hope of reunited our country to put the Cold War on the side and to forget about all of that. Of course, today the context has changed a lot. But we do hope that in 25 years we would be happy to have Russia on the map, and there will be cycling tourism being developed in Russia as well. We shouldn't forget also that Russia has a very large population, and if we want a global sustainability, we need also to have Russian cycling more, and that's a fact. So indeed, at the bottom of the list, there's it's the countries where there is no EuroVelo development today. There is Russia in the list, and Belarus, for example, and Malta, for example. I'm just picking a few of them. So there are some countries where 0% of EuroVelo routes are developed at the moment, but in some of them, for example, Romania, there's still 0% of developed sections of EuroVelo in Romania, but we have very positive contacts with the authorities in Romania. We know that there's a lot of efforts invested to develop quality cycle routes, especially the EuroVelo 6 along the Danube, because the Danube is, of course, crossing Romania, making the border with Bulgaria for some kilometers before the mouth. So that's some examples.
The EuroVelo network is over 20 years old. Is it 25 years?
25, yes.
25
26.
years old.
Yeah, this week's there was a 26th birthday.
Yes, I saw a tweet and some people signing something to presumably start the whole initiative. When it was created 26 years ago, there were 12, 13 routes, and that has increased now to, it's difficult to say because you don't use all the numbers.
17
routes.
Yeah.
So do you envisage in the future that more routes will be added? And if that's the case, where will they be? Have you got any ideas as to where those new routes might be in the future?
So indeed, when the network was launched, there were 12 EuroVelo routes at that time, and it was the pioneers drawing some lines on the map, and those sometimes became reality since then. So today we have 17 routes, and indeed there is a very specific process of adding new routes or extending existing routes, because of course the brand gained more and more recognition. So the question we usually receive is, why don't I have a EuroVelo route going through my city? And that's a fair point. But the point of the main goal of EuroVelo as the European Cycle Route Network is to include European relevant cycle routes. So we have a few criteria to explain what is a European relevant cycle route, because of course it's supposed to be the backbone of all the cycle routes, and it will never cover the needs of all cyclists. So in a country, after taking into account EuroVelo routes, you should further develop cycle routes of national level to answer national needs, so to connect one city to the other at a national scale, and then those should be developed at a regional and a more local level. That's how you build a proper cycling strategy, and you answer the needs of all type of cyclists, from the daily users to the leisure to the tourists. That being said, what are the requirements of EuroVelo? So a EuroVelo route should be at least 1,000 kilometers long and should cover at least 2 countries. And for those routes that want to join EuroVelo, we expect the highest quality standards possible, because we aim also to complete the EuroVelo network by 2030. Today, only 66% of the EuroVelo network is ready to cycle, which means that you can cycle on a route, you can access the information about where to cycle, and you may see EuroVelo signage or national signage. If we focus only on the ready-to-cycle sections with EuroVelo signage, it's 37% of the network. It's already more than 30,000 kilometers, so it's not nothing, but we are not yet to the 92,000 kilometers completed. So yeah, we expect high quality of cycle routes for new cycle routes to join the EuroVelo network. Now, to answer your question about where do we see potential development, well, there has been a strategy adopted by EuroVelo in 2020, the EuroVelo Strategy 2030, to define what's our goal, what's our overall and joint strategy at the European level. The main focus for now of EuroVelo is the quality of the network, quality over quantity. So we don't want to cover all individual cities, but we are open to include more routes, especially the most relevant routes at the European level, meaning that we strongly encourage those countries which capital cities are not crossed by a EuroVelo route to consider building up an application together with neighboring countries and maybe suggest a new EuroVelo route to join the network. So at the moment, we have one candidate route. So we are working together with one candidate route. It's the Iberian cycle route, maybe the future EuroVelo 16. This city would start in Lisbon, then cross Portugal and Spain through Madrid, which doesn't have a EuroVelo route at the moment, and will end in Pamplona, where EuroVelo 3 and EuroVelo 1 are already crossing, so making a hub in the Iberian Peninsula. So that's one example. We announced the official status of candidate routes to the future EuroVelo 16 in September, and we have 3 years, maybe 6 years in front of us to work together with the Spanish and Portuguese partners to make the route fulfill the requirements, the quality requirements of a EuroVelo route, so that it will really join the network when the work will be done. So that's a long process. It's a very demanding process also for the applicant routes, but also because we want them to take EuroVelo as a serious project, and we want also to push the quality of the network up.
We'll be going back to my chat with Agathe in a few minutes, but it's interesting that she mentions the potential future EuroVelo 16 there across the Iberian Peninsula, so one to potentially add to the map in a few years' time. Now, we're still sticking with the EuroVelos. We're going to move and talk about EuroVelo 8, which runs from Greece all the way to the southern part of Spain, to Andalusia. We're going to hear from Svetlana and her friend, Quentin Muncaster. Svetlana, she describes herself as a Russian from Estonia, and Quentin is from Oxford. He sounds like, or rather he should be, if he wants a new career, then he should really get a job as a Radio 4 announcer, because he has an amazing voice, as you're about to hear. Now, they are currently at the very end of a cycle in New Zealand. I've just checked on their website, and it looks as though in the last couple of days they've actually completed that cycle. So I don't know where they're going next. I'm sure they're going to continue somewhere else. But last year they had the opportunity of cycling along the Croatian coast, and that was before they flew over to New Zealand. And this is the story of how they got on. So, Svetlana, over to you.
Hello, we're Alana and Quentin from Oxford, England. We're friends and have been cycle touring together in UK and abroad for about 6 years now. Currently we are in New Zealand on another adventure. However, this time now we would like to tell you about our trip to Croatia.
The winter of 2023-24 is meant to be the year of continuous summer and cycling adventure for us. So we left our jobs, packed our bikes and flew off to Croatia for a month of October to cycle it from Dubrovnik in the south through some islands to Pula on the Istrian Peninsula. And then the route would turn east to capital city of Zagreb, from where we flew to New Zealand.
When we were preparing for the trip, we saw a lot of videos on YouTube of cycling on gravel roads. Although it is not our favorite terrain, as we both much prefer smooth cruising on the tarmac, we mentally and physically prepared ourselves by fitting wider tires on our bikes. Quentin's bike is a Doors Galaxy, which has 32 tires, 32-inch tires, and mine is a gravel bike Fuji with 42-inch tires, which I transformed into a touring bike with both front and back pannier racks.
We arrived in Dubrovnik on the 1st of October and assembled our bikes at the airport, and then we were ready to go. EuroVelo 8, although conveniently passes the airport though, is very heavy with traffic, as it only is the only road leading to Dubrovnik. It is narrow and has a considerable section of elevation, with no cycle lane. Our alternative plan was to do a loop cycle over the Dinaric Alps, I think, crossing into Bosnia and then descending down into Dubrovnik. However, this meant ascending around 14% or so hills on the bikes that had just been assembled, and therefore probably susceptible to all sorts of issues.
As a result, as per advice of our dear friend and bike mechanic Kiro, we decided to take a more sensible option and take a taxi to Dubrovnik. We were quoted around €100 by some taxi company, whilst they heard that we wanted to transport 2 bicycles. But as the destiny would have it, a random taxi van driver arrived at the cafe opposite the airport just as we walked up to it. The driver proved to be a very helpful man, disassembled back row seats for us and squeezed our bikes in. In the end, he only asked for half of that price.
On the first day, we ended up soaking the sun on Bellevue Beach and swimming in a very salty Mediterranean Sea. In the evening, we were pleasantly surprised by an orchestral concert which was playing on the main square, which celebrated the Croatia's win over Dubrovnik's siege by the Yugoslavs in 1991. We spent the first few days walking and exploring the city that rivaled Venice's dominance. Amongst other things, we learned that the existing city walls were constructed mainly during the period of the 13th to 17th centuries and had 4 strong fortresses.
Having spent a few days relaxing and doing usual tourist stuff, we were both itching to go on our bikes. But we had few issues to resolve. My bicycle, when loaded with panniers, was shaking, and I was worried that was due to overpacking. Although I did only pack the essential things for 6 months long trip. As I found out later, the instability in fact was caused by my new Ortlieb backpack pannier being placed across my 2 other panniers as per Ortlieb's design. However, the issue was solved by placing top rack lengthwise instead of sideways. Quentin's bike, however, needed a new derailleur altogether, and whilst purchasing it, he bumped into a French cyclist who had not just a fully loaded bike, but also a trailer with a Labrador in it. This acquaintance made me feel confident that my bike wobbling problem is definitely caused by wrong weight distribution and not the amount.
When we solved these issues, we were ready to set off, but this didn't really happen in the ordinary way, along the road, but we had to take a boat out of Dubrovnik to avoid that same and only D8 road, which is, as we've said before, is the EuroVelo 8. Dubrovnik is located on a narrow sliver of land squashed between Dinaric Alps and the sea, and it makes it impossible to build an alternative route. The boat out of Dubrovnik to Millet was our first out of many ferry crossings, and we arrived in National Park around the early evening and cycled to our accommodation in a little fishing village called Palace on the shore. It was an idyllic location to start the bike touring trip. It was a little village in the inland harbour with an inland harbour and a hill opposite side. It was surrounded by a thick pine forest, the reflection of which was visible in the water. We took a dip in the tranquil sweet sea upon arrival. This fishing village had a very quiet and relaxed feeling about it. The local fishermen were coming in and out of the harbour well past the twilight time, and then sailing out into the open at sunrise.
The following morning, as we were cycling past the National Park Information Desk, we were asked by the lady in a booth if we had tickets to enter, which was a little surprising having been used to UK's free national parks. As we discovered later, the entrance to all national parks in Croatia has a charge. On our cycle trip through Croatia, we visited Krka National Park with its stunning waterfalls and Paklenica National Park, which includes the largest mountain in the Croatian dynamic Alps, called Velebit. It is also the paradise for rock climbers, where they can be seen clambering up sheer cliffs. Very impressive.
While cycling in Croatia, we passed a number of quiet roads, and they had absolutely excellent surfaces. We were often surrounded by pines with very powerful scent, which was getting stronger in the heat of the day. Our route often went through the number of islands, such as Korčula, Pag, Rab, Kirk and Cres. It quickly became a norm to be cycling up several miles long hill with steep gradients and then coming down with epic descents. All in all, we took about, 7 ferries to hop from island to island, but the most memorable was crossing from Pag to Rab, where we really thought the little boat was going to be wrong, but it was going to capsize. The waves were so high that they were actually coming into the hull. We read that the cycling on Pag could be really challenging at times due to the strong bore side wind which comes from the mountains, but really we only experienced it on that sea crossing. Once we reached Rab shore, we made sure we had celebrated our survival with the normal cake and coffee.
Generally, the ferry ticket purchasing process was quite straightforward. The company Jedrilinia allows to book the ticket for passengers and the bike online, and the most expensive one costs us €15 per person.
On our tour, we visited such stunning cities such as Dubrovnik, Korčula, Split, Trogir, Šibenik, Zadar, Pula, Rovinj, Rijeka, and Zagreb, and we were travelling from a south to north direction. The road connecting the Istrian Peninsula with mainland approaching Rijeka reminded us of the French Riviera, full of old-fashioned chateau-style houses and large hotels. The next stretch from Rijeka to Karlovac into the mainland we completed by train, though, and that was through rural countryside, which was very different from the Italian-like coast. It definitely felt like Austria with its alpine-style houses and green mountains. At that point, we were grateful that we had chosen the slow train instead of overcoming these huge alpine contours. We took the train to Karlovac city, located around an equal distance between the coast and the city of Zagreb, which was a perfect place to continue our cycle trip. It's the final cycle ride towards the capital. We were really looking forward to this stretch of route until we were chased by untethered dogs with the viciousness that we hadn't encountered before. And Lana even had to make a weapon just to use as a stick to scare them off.
We had our camping gear with us, but we only camped for 7 nights, and that was due mainly to various factors, but primarily the weather becoming cold overnight, sun getting down, sun setting at 6 p.m. and convenience to be close to the center when visiting a large city. We did wild camp though one night in the forest during a night of thunder and lightning, and were pleasantly surprised to know that our tents didn't leak and we were able to sleep through the storm. It should be noted that most of the campground surfaces were quite stony, so something like a light mat under the air mattress is recommended. In our experience, the weather in October was great for the first 2 weeks, but then it cooled by a few degrees. Therefore, we would have rather cycled from mid-September to mid-October.
A highlight of every cycle touring trip, I think, we both think, is the food, of course. The Croatian coast has Mediterranean cuisine, which offers pizza, pasta, meat and fish dishes. However, the inland tends to have food similar to Eastern Europe, with its stews and sort of heavy, hearty meals using lard and lots of black pepper, paprika and garlic. The most memorable food for us were the buriaks, which were the pastry rolls. They were delicious, and they were either filled with meat or cottage cheese options. Croatians love their bakeries and are frequently found on the side of the road. We also learned that there's these square metal frames which are often spotted along the road and the front gardens. And they are the hog roasting ovens, which are a favourite national delicacy. When it comes to the alcohol, you can't really leave Croatia without trying rakia. In our case, we were unexpectedly offered it near our last day, actually, to be honest, which was a homemade rakia by a hardware shop owner. When we were trying to buy some items, preparing the bags for our next flight. It was too impossible to refuse him, especially as he'd given us some bubble wrap for free.
All in all, we really enjoyed our experience and proved that cycle touring in Croatia can be done on paved and quiet roads. If you're thinking of a similar journey in Croatia and would like more detail on our trip, you're welcome to check on the route on Polar Steps application. If you would like to get in touch with questions or anything else, you're welcome to do so by emailing me on U for uniform, hotel, Alpha November, Oscar Victor Alpha, Sierra at gmail.com. It is juhanovas@gmail.com. Happy cycling, everyone.
Thank you, Svetlana and Quentin. Now, just to clarify, the Polar Steps website, you'll find it if you go to polarsteps.com/Lana Uanova. And I'll just spell that. It's LANAUHHANOVA. And that's where you'll find information about all their cycling journeys. I have to say, when they were talking about the EuroVelo 8, it brought back memories of when I cycled the route back in 2013, and it was the second book that I wrote along the Med. My experiences were a mixture of very, very good and also having food poisoning, courtesy of a very dodgy campsite on the island of Pag, which is one of the islands that Quentin mentioned. Anyway, it's a beautiful area. I would certainly recommend it. And it is actually one of the routes that Agat is about to mention in the second part of our chat. And I asked her about the EuroVelo conference that takes place annually. She'd just come back from the last one, which took place in Turkey. So I asked her what the conference was all about and what was the reason for having it in the first place.
Well, the point of the EuroVelo and Cycling Tourism Conference is to gather the leaders, the stakeholders of cycling tourism in Europe and even abroad, because it's the biggest conference of its type in the world. So we aim to gather all the specialists, all the experts on cycle routes development and cycling tourism, and to gather them together so that we can share experiences, share best practices in sessions. So we work on a program, on a theme, and this year's theme was Cycling a New Perspective on Heritage. So to demonstrate how cycling is a way to give access to natural and cultural heritage sites, to be a part of the heritage of a country, of a city sometimes. So we were talking about the branding and the marketing strategies. That's another example. So we do that during 3 days with the networking opportunities, of course, and also presentations. And we put people on bikes also. So you have the chance during the conference to go on bike and to discover the cycling infrastructure of the host. So we did that on EuroVelo 8 in Izmir this year. The last EuroVelo and Cycling Tourism Conference happened in Izmir, and we were very happy to gather the community there. It's indeed the point is to gather all the ones working on developing long distance cycle routes and cycling tourism, from the public authorities, public institutions, to the private stakeholders, the companies, to the advocates, the one that try to push from the citizen point of view to develop further the projects, and all the mixed public-private stakeholders, let's say, that also have a role. Also the press, the media, such as yourself, maybe you will have the chance to attend the EuroVelo conference in the future. And yeah, it's very European oriented. The point is not to be national focused, but more broader, with a broader view, and to share knowledge. Yeah, very good atmosphere, very good feedback from the conference of 2023. And we are looking forward to next year, 2024. In September, we will meet in Denmark. So it's a different city in a different country hosting the conference every year. And we hope that the event will grow, because it will mean that there is more and more interest on that topic, and that we reach our goal of bringing people together, bringing specialists together, and help further development, further ideas, further partnership to grow. That's the point, I would say, of this conference.
It's interesting that you said it was the biggest conference of its type in the world, and that it attracts a few people who come from perhaps outside Europe. Perhaps the best known network, comparable network to the EuroVelo network, is the American Adventure Cycling Association's network. Do you ever work with them? And if you do, what kind of things can you learn from them, and what kind of things can they learn from the EuroVelo network?
Well, for this year's conference, we didn't have representatives from the US, neither from Canada, as far as I know. But there's a lot of good practices to take from there, of course. Indeed, Adventure Cycling Association is one of the oldest association of its type, and they also run the National Cycle Route Network in the US. That's a good example, and we are also checking their website regularly to see what they are doing, and probably they do the same. We had partnerships, we had joint activities in the past, especially joint promotion activities, and we've been in touch. I mean, we had joint events in the past, even though I have to say that we are so busy that we sometimes struggle to find the time to properly connect with the world of cycling tourism in general, and that's a problem. But yeah, that's a problem for me, at least. In Canada, there's a very good example also in Quebec. Well, multiple good examples in Quebec. La Route Verte, the Green Road, for example, is a historical example of long distance cycle routes, and it has been developed by Vélo Québec for many years. And we've seen also quite recent developments in, was it in Ontario? Maybe, but anyway, we try to follow up on the different events happening on the same topic, and we would be happy to have American or Canadian or whatever from other continents representatives in future EuroVelo conference. This year we had the Japanese partners taking part in the EuroVelo conference from the Japanese Cycling Tourism Association, and we have quite a lot of discussions with them because they would like to apply the EuroVelo knowledge in Japan. And we were also lucky because the conference was happening in Turkey. It enabled some Central Asian representatives to take part from Armenia, from Georgia, for example.
If you were to choose one of the 17 EuroVelo routes to cycle in its entirety, which one would you choose and why?
Well, I wouldn't choose. I will like to cycle all of them. There's some of them, some sections I already cycled and I really enjoyed. EuroVelo 4 in France, especially along the coast. I do enjoy cycling along the sea, so along the English Channel on EuroVelo 4 in France, or on the Atlantic coast, for example, in Ireland or in France as well. But cycle routes are also really nice along rivers. That I did for some sections along the Danube, for example, in Serbia, in Romania. That's really really interesting also because it's quite far away from where I come from, so it's also very interesting. So the Danube cycle route is definitely one of the best. It's part of EuroVelo 6, very well developed. It continues also. It's the river cycle route, so it follows the Danube, but also the Loire in France, which is also a very nice cycle route. I would definitely be curious to cycle EuroVelo 15, the Rhine cycle route, which is the only certified cycle route we have on the EuroVelo network, and I never cycled it. Just maybe I followed a little bit the Rhine in Basel or in Strasbourg, but never cycled it. It could be on my bucket list for the next ones. A less known hidden gem would be EuroVelo 19, the Meuse cycle route in France, Belgium, the Netherlands. I know very badly those regions. I would be very happy to discover this route. And yeah, because I like the sea, EuroVelo 8 along the Mediterranean coast. I had the chance to cycle a little bit of it in Izmir, for example, in Turkey, but that would definitely be on my list as well to cycle the EuroVelo 8. And the more I cycle, the more I like and enjoy cycling in mountains. I think it's a very good mix. It's challenging, of course, but the more I practice it, the more I enjoy it as well. To just go slowly up hills, enjoy the landscape. So I would definitely be in favor of cycling through the Alps, through the Pyrenees, even though it's not accessible for all type of cyclists, of course. But that's something I do enjoy personally.
Okay, brilliant. Right, well, thank you for talking. It's been a fascinating chat, and good luck with the development of the EuroVelo network in the future, and making sure that by 2030 the deadline?
Yeah, well, the deadline, it will be just, if we have the network complete, then we could start to do other things also. So that's hopefully just a start, but that's an ambitious goal for sure.
Okay, well, good luck, and hopefully by 2030 we'll have a completed network all across Europe.
Well, yeah, and thank you very much for your support and the very nice content you've been publishing on your website, and that's really useful for us also to have some committed and expert people like you sharing knowledge and trying to make it accessible for the broad public to cycle more. So that's very, very useful. Thank you for the invitation and for inviting me. And if ever you come to Brussels, don't hesitate to visit. We would be happy to show you around the city, EuroVelo 5 in Brussels, or even just grab a coffee and hearing a bit more about what you do.
Okay, thank you. I'll be there.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you to Agat for agreeing to have that chat with me way back in November. Yeah, November of last year. And again, I apologise, Agat, that it's taken me so long to pull my finger out, get this podcast edited, and actually upload it to the internet. If you've got any questions about EuroVelo, the best place to go is their website, eurovelo.com, and you'll find all the details about the routes and what have you over there. Now, the podcast is not yet finished. You're going to be hearing from a chap called Seth Maltzman in a few moments, but he will be the final bit of the podcast. So before we hear from him, if you need to get in contact, if you want to get in contact, then you can do so by visiting cyclingeurope.org/contact, and you'll find all the contact details there. If you'd like to support the podcast, then you can do so by visiting cyclingeurope.org/support, and that's always appreciated. There are costs involved, and it's good that a few people out there do contribute on a occasional or even monthly basis to help make life a little bit easier when it comes to actually paying for everything. And also, if you like the podcast, then please rate it on the platform that you're listening on. If you hate the podcast, then it's amazing that you've made it this far in the podcast. But if you hate it, don't bother giving it a review. But if you love it, then give it a rating and perhaps even a review, and tell all your friends about it. Now, we will be back soon with episode 78, okay? I promise. And it's going to be an interview with somebody who cycled, another French person actually, who cycled all the way from France to South Korea in the summer of last year. He's actually a scout, and with a couple of friends he decided to cycle all the way to the Scout Jamboree. So he will be episode 78, which should be available soon, hopefully. Now, Seth Maltzman, he contacted me at the end of last year. He's from Philadelphia in the United States. He's a 66-year-old lawyer, and I just reread his email a few minutes ago. He said the following: "Your podcasts are wonderful, but I thought I could add something you do not talk about a lot, specifically how bike trips can turn into total and complete disasters." So here we go. Get ready to, wince occasionally, smile. Here is Seth's tale of being a cyclist in Europe over the course of the last decade or so. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in episode 78. Over to you, Seth.
My name is Seth Maltzman. I'm 66 years old, and I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I started my bike touring life in 2016 when I agreed with a friend to cycle from Bordeaux along the Canal du Midi to the Mediterranean, and then I was to proceed alone along the coast, ultimately ending in Barcelona, where I would meet my wife. I'm an insulin-dependent diabetic, and I have sleep apnea, and I need a CPAP machine to sleep. One of my panniers was for my clothing, and the second was for all of my medical equipment. Neither one of us had cycle toured before, and we intended to stay in hotels along the way. I purchased a specialized diverge for the trip, and my friend rented his bike in France. I boxed my bike intending to dispose of the box in Bordeaux and find another bike box at the end of my journey. We wanted to bike 50 to 60 kilometers per day, but on the first day we became hopelessly lost, and we ended up doing well over 100 kilometers over hills and valleys. By the end of the third day, I realized I had purchased the wrong bike seat, as I had 2 saddle sores, each the size of a football. It was as if someone had placed 2 hot irons on each cheek. My friend carried on without me, and I remained in Carcassonne for an additional 2 days. I made it to Narbonne and proceeded alone to Barcelona. I arrived in Girona and needed to purchase a new bike seat. It was a Sunday night at dusk, and I was driven by a cab to a bike shop approximately an hour from my hotel. It was the only bike shop open late on a Sunday. I purchased a new seat, and I hoped to find a taxi back. As I began to walk, a ferocious thunderstorm struck, and I was caught outside with no cover. I kept walking, and I was not knowing where I was going. I checked my phone for directions, and I realized I left my phone in the cab. I was lost and very wet. I saw lights up ahead, and with relief found an open general store. 2 elderly Korean women were behind the counter. I asked if they could direct me to the closest train station. They did not understand English, and I did not speak Korean. I thought I could get my message across with body language, so I thrust my arms up over my head and pulled up and down while making the sound chugga chugga choo choo. At first, they thought I was from another planet. Then suddenly, one woman's eyes got very large and pointed to me to wait where I was. I heard rustling in the back, and she came out with a big smile on her face. She seemed so pleased as she approached me, and she thrust her hands forward and handed me a red Matchbox train. I walked another hour back into town aimlessly, walking, and finally found my hotel. Miraculously, the cab company was called and they returned my phone. I learned that the Spanish were very friendly and warm people. It was July and very hot, but I had a pleasant ride from Girona to Barcelona. At one point, I made a mistake and ran out of water in the Catalonian hills. I was in a forested area on a 1-lane road when I saw on top of a hill what appeared to me to be a fruit stand. I was quite nervous about running out of water, but this opportunity put my mind at ease. As I reached the top of the hill, I saw an elderly woman sitting next to the table. She was waving at me and yelling, "Hola!" I thought how warm and friendly the Spanish people were, and I imagined a sweet piece of fruit quenching my thirst. As I approached on my bike, I did not see anything on the table, but the woman greeted me very warmly. I waved to her, but carried on very disappointed. I climbed another 30 minutes and saw a second woman, middle-aged, also sitting in a chair. She also was waving at me, and I was energized by the outgoing Spanish people. So friendly. She surely must have fruit. Once again I was disappointed, and vowed never to be caught without liquids. Finally, I descended from the hills, and as the road curved, I saw a third woman, very young, sitting in the same lawn chair but only wearing a bikini. She jumped out of her seat when she saw me coming down the hill, and while she was screaming "Hola" at me, I finally awoke from my naivete and realized that this was not the kind of fruit I had anticipated. I had 5 wonderful days in Barcelona with my wife. On the first day, we were walking along the beach and decided to take a bike taxi to see the sights and end up at a casino at the end of the promenade. Having never been to Barcelona before, we thought that the €35 fee was acceptable. As we approached each intersection, the driver was calling out to his friends in Spanish, "Look at these 2 idiots, they paid me €35. All their friends were screaming back at us to come ride with them. Yeah, we were idiots, but we were laughing, and after all, we were in beautiful Barcelona. When we entered the casino, we were told we needed a passport to get in. Neither one of us had passports, and we had to walk back to the hotel. Each day I stopped at 2 to 3 bike shops hoping to purchase a cardboard box. No one claimed to have boxes. They said all the new boxes got shipped back to the manufacturer. It became a real concern, and it wasn't until the last day, while at a flea market, that I spied an enormous box, way too wide and way too long, but begged for it, and the marketeer generously gave me his box. We spent the rest of the day trying to find a cab big enough for the box, while also hunting down duct tape, a marker, and scissors. My wife was so patient, giving up a full day for me in the heat and watching me struggle with anxiety and really bad karma. I learned never to dispose of my box on future trips. In the next 5 years, I always confirmed with the hotel at the beginning of my trip that they would store my bike box for me, so on my return, I would have something to put my bike in for the return flight. In 2017, I planned a 5-day trip through the Netherlands. My wife agreed to tour Amsterdam with me, and she would fly home while I bike toured. On the last day before she left, I put my bike together, but for some reason, my front wheel would not turn. It was stiff as a rock. I knew it had to be a problem in the stem and took it apart, and for hours we tried to make it work. No luck. We decided we had to find a repair shop in Amsterdam. Because Amsterdam is bike heaven, I thought this would be an easy fix by a professional. We stopped at 5 bike shops, and not one was willing to work on a gravel bike. By the time I got to the 5th shop, we must have exuded bad karma. As the mechanic said, "I don't have the mojo to deal with you." Begging was my next approach, but he sternly asked us to leave. It was late afternoon and we were running out of time. My last resort was to go into a Mac bike shop, which is a rental bike shop, and I described the problem. The mechanic told us to wait next door at a bar. I ordered 4 iced teas and my wife had a Coke. Within 15 minutes, the mechanic came over with a look of bewilderment on his face and said it was fixed and that would be €10. The following 2 years, I biked through the Netherlands and Belgium, always trying to follow World War II battlefields and historic sites. I biked through the area of the Battle of the Bulge and Operation Market Garden. I was thrilled to see the foxholes outside of Bastogne. In 2020, I could not make the trip because of COVID, but in August 2021, I was determined to get my Europe biking touring fix. Getting the necessary paperwork from the French government was complicated, and I was told I could not visit the Netherlands. However, I transited from Philadelphia through Amsterdam, being told not to leave the airport, and caught a KLM flight to Montpellier, where I intended to bike through Provence. I landed in Montpellier with my bike, but none of my packs had arrived. They were left on the tarmac in Pennsylvania. After I landed in Montpellier, I spent 36 hours biking in my long pants all over the city, purchasing panniers and bike clothing. I'm a 2XL, and not many French stores had anything remotely my size, so I spent many hours riding in the sun all over Montpellier, trying to put my plans back together. In my most frustrating moment in the heat of the second day of scrounging, I saw the 4 p.m. KLM flight I flew the day before circle for a landing in Montpellier. As I was climbing a hill on my way to a decathlon, I said to myself, wouldn't it be funny if my packs were on that plane? I spent $700 that day in replacement equipment. When I arrived back at my hotel, I asked the clerk if by any chance my packs had arrived. No, was my answer. I carried my purchases up to my room, where on my bed I saw my 2 packs from the U.S. I now had 2 of everything and 4 large panniers. I traveled from Montpellier to Arles. I was at the spot where Van Gogh painted the Rhone. I rode wonderful trails from Arles to Cavaillon to Apt and on to Avignon and Nîmes. On my way to Apt, on a very nice dedicated bike trail, surrounded by Roman ruins, I decided it was time to put some music on and played my favorite 70s music on my speaker. It was a long, flat stretch, and a couple was walking ahead of me. They kept looking back at me and shaking their heads. I expected the worst as I approached, and they stepped aside, and I politely said to them, "It's Elvis!" Huge smiles and a wave from the couple reassured me there was a universal language. While touring Apt, we met again and had a wonderful greeting and a long conversation. Provence was steeped in history, and I was so pleased I made the trip. I prefer to travel alone, making my own plans, stopping in the countryside when the feeling strikes me. Yes, Andrew, there is nothing better than a bike, the countryside, cheese, and bread. My plan was to head south to the Spanish border, stopping in Narbonne. There's a museum in the south of Narbonne to the people held in World War II camps at a location called Rive-Salle, very close to the Spanish border. I was at a train station in Port La Nouvelle when I realized my phone was stolen. It was a major setback. I had all of my personal information and passwords on my phone, and I was really beside myself. I hoped that the iPhone protection was going to work, and I was determined to contact my bank and credit card companies as soon as I could get a new phone. In Narbonne, I tried to buy a new phone, only to be told by several phone stores that they could only sell me an internet phone with no data, no international calling or texting. By the way, it's not the end of the world to be freed from your phone, but I still had anxiety over whether my banking information would be exposed to the phone thieves. The next day, I learned that the Netherlands was accepting visitors from the U.S., and I really wanted to travel to the northern part of the country and visit Friesland. As I checked in at the Montpellier airport with my bike box in hand, I was distracted for a minute by the ticket agent examining my bike and left my wallet on the counter, as I was told to wrap plastic around my packs. At the time, there were only 2 passengers in the terminal and 2 desk agents. When I turned around, my wallet was gone. It had all of my money and credit cards and ID, except for my passport and some cash, which was in my pocket. The police at the airport did not want to help me and told me to go back to the center of town and make a report. My flight was leaving in an hour, and that was not an option, so I flew on to Amsterdam. You realize that in order to report a credit card stolen, you have to go through a 2-step authentication process. You have to have an internet connection and your phone to report anything stolen. Without my phone, I could not report anything stolen to my bank or my credit card companies. I made one and only one smart decision in this trip, and that was to make a photocopy of the front and back of all my credit cards, ID, and passport on old-fashioned paper, and I had that with me. This helped a great deal as I was able to get a phone in the Netherlands with a useful SIM card, and I began calling the U.S. from Holland. But before I attempted to prevent the loss of my money and credit cards, I stopped at a coffee shop in Amsterdam, where I spent my last few euros on something that would make me forget my misery. Finally, in 2022, I made it to the North Sea and biked from Amsterdam to Schermonikoog, where the island is filled with World War II bunkers, beautiful bike paths, and wide sandy beaches with views. Keeping with my tradition of disasters, I became sick with COVID and spent the last 3 days of my trip in an Amsterdam hotel. I have to tell you, Andrew, that despite my many challenges, I'm committed to return to Europe and continue with my bike touring. But this time, I will invest in an hermetically sealed recumbent bike.